Prynhawn da a chroeso, welcome to Hay Festival's Book of the Month for November. My name is Megan Davis and I'm thrilled to be joining you today to discuss this glorious book, Y Bachgen, y Wahadden, y Llwynog a'r Ceffyl, written of course in English by Charlie Mackesy and translated into the Welsh language by Mererid Hopwood. I'm a journalist, I'm a bookworm, but more importantly today I'm here to guide you through this very exciting talk. It's a real joy. But before we crack on with our panel this afternoon, I do have a few things to mention, a few housekeeping rules, if you will. If you're yet to get your hands on a copy of this book, as I've already shown you, there are copies available on the Hay Festival website, or of course, go out and support your local bookshop. The second thing on my list are your questions. I want today to be as interactive as possible. So if there's something you are itching for me to ask, something you really want to know, hear from Mererid or Charlie, please submit your questions using the questions function on the screen below. There are some very technical wizards here at Hay Festival that will see all of those questions, filter them to me, and I promise I'll do my best to get through them as quickly as possible. If you're a Welsh speaker, os ydych chi'n siarad Cymraeg, a subtitled version of this conversation will be available shortly after broadcast. Felly cadwch lyged ar ein gwefannau cymdeithasol, keep an eye out. And if you're watching this on catch-up, then I hope you enjoy. And finally, the last thing I want to say is thank you. Thank you for donating to the festival's Future Fund whilst registering for today's event. You can continue to do so and support the festival by donating once again on the website. That's it. I think I've reached the end of my list of things to tell you, which means that we can start today's very exciting Q&A. Today's book of the month, of course, as I've already mentioned, is the Welsh language translation of Charlie Mackesy's award-winning, chart-topping, record-breaking work, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. Now, this book was released in October 2019, if I'm correct, just a few months before I think it's fair to say the world definitely changed. It's little wonder then that this story of friendship, of kindness, adversity and resilience captured the imagination, but most importantly captured the hearts of millions of people across the world in various different languages. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Charlie's name, I have no doubt that you'll have seen his illustrations in shop windows, for example, on t-shirts, on the walls of hospitals, prisons, schools and refuges. His sentiments, his lessons, his thoughts and feelings, of course, through his work have been used by teachers, therapists, and even by armies. Charlie Mackesy has multiple strings to his very enviable bow. He's worked for the Oxford University Press, The Spectator, alongside someone you might have heard of called Richard Curtis on the set of Love Actually, and even with Nelson Mandela on the Unity series. It gives me great joy as a Welsh speaker to see Charlie's work translated into yet another language, our language, of course, Welsh. His words have been captured most beautifully by the award-winning poet, writer, academic and translator Mererid Hopwood. Now, if you don't know Mererid's name, she is one of Wales's most celebrated literary names. She's a 3-time Eisteddfod Prize winner, which I can promise you is no mean feat. She spent a period of time as the Children's Laureate of Wales. She's been the recipient of the Welsh Language Book of the Year, and she's also won the Tir Nanog Prize for her children's writing. If her literary accolades aren't enough, I'm very jealous of the fact that she also boasts degrees in Spanish and in German. Finally, if I can catch my breath, her CV boasts the title of the Cymraeg Rhyngwladol Cymru Greadigol, or the Hay Festival Creative Wales International Fellow for 2020-2021. I think it's fair to say I'm with two very, very talented people. It's a real treat to be with you. Charlie and Mererid, croeso, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Charlie, if you'll allow me to start with you, I'm going to ask you how you're doing and how you feel seeing this book in the Welsh language.
I'm okay. I'm all right. Thank you. I'm really moved to hear Mererid's just how many things she's done. It's really but I knew some of that, not all of that. So yeah, I'm okay. I'm slightly in awe of the company I'm sitting in. And yeah, I just actually sent a copy of the Welsh translation to my friend who's a nurse in Wales, so who's been waiting patiently for a translation. So I'm just for that one reason alone, I think that she's had a hard 2 years. So I'm glad she's got a copy. You know, I love Wales, and I love you know, seeing it in. I hand wrote. Yeah, it was fun to do the cover. You know, it's a beautiful language. Yeah. Anyway, so there you go. That's how I feel.
It's quite fitting that you'd send this book to your friend who's working at the NHS, because as you've already mentioned, as I've mentioned, you know, this is a story that's touched so many people. And you've said in the past, I know that the 4 characters represent different elements of you as an individual, but also of us as people. Did you ever imagine it would be translated? Was that something that was on your kind of list of wishes for the book?
I truly never imagined that it would even be a book. So the idea of it being translated is way beyond my dreams, I think. You know, I kind of wrote it. I did the drawings for my friends, for people that I care for, and then I suppose when they were on Instagram, I shared them there. So, but the idea of a book to me was so grand and so outlandish, and so. It's what other people do. It's you. It's not what you do. You know, I just was a scruffy person making drawings, and so for me, it's always a shock, and you know, and it's a lovely shock. I mean, shock has negative implications, so it's just a continued surprise, really, that it is where it is. You know. Yeah.
I recently saw a tweet actually with your illustrations in sort of plastered on the walls of the metro in Paris. That's how far-reaching your work is.
Did you see that? Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah, the metro.
Mererid, were you familiar with Charlie's work before you were approached to translate this book?
Well, yes, and Charlie said there about a dream. This for me is certainly like a dream, because this book existed in our family long before anybody had thought about asking to have a Welsh translation. I remember seeing it. It was just before Christmas 2019. It was on the till in one of the bookshops in Carmarthen, and I was buying other books, and the assistant said, "Oh, I'm sure you'd like this book." And I looked at the cover, and it was so calm, and everything else was so busy. In our family, like probably many other families. And I thought, yes, one of my girls could, I'm sure, enjoy that book, and bringing a piece of that calm wouldn't be a bad idea. And I took it home, and we have fallen in love with it, as so many other people have. So then being asked to translate it was was totally unexpected and a real thrill, but also, of course, there was a huge sense of responsibility and slight fear.
Before we go on to talk about the process of that translation, Charlie, if you would you mind sort of summing up this story for us in a sentence for someone that hasn't yet got the chance to sit down and read it?
Well, it's mainly pictures. Largely, and it's a book about a boy, a mole, a fox, and a horse, and it's really their relationship with each other, and their journey into, I suppose, being known, fully known, and facing their fears, you know, and they have quite big questions they talk about. So it's a hard book to summarize. But I hope I've done okay. But yeah, so the narrative, the story really is in their conversation more than the events. The events a few events happen, but it's largely their journey into each other and into being known, fully known and fully loved. Yeah.
It's you've touched on the how difficult it is to summarize. Mererid, if I can turn to you and ask you how difficult it might have been to translate. I've done a little bit of translation, nothing comparable to the work that you've done, but I know that being able to understand words is one thing, putting words together is one thing, but being able to translate a meaning is a real craft. Being able to translate a feeling and a quality is something that takes years to hone and craft. Can you talk us through that process a little bit? Where did you start?
Yes, well, you know, this is not like translating some policy documents or an exercise. This is this is something else. The German word for translation is übersetzen, and I like that because it literally means carrying from one side of the river to the other. And of course, there are dangers inherent in that, and you want to get to the other side with as much of the original cargo as you possibly can without having caused any great catastrophe. So the first thing I think you have to do with something like this is to become totally familiar with the work. You've got to really read it and try your best to get to the soul of it. Because this is a book for the soul. And the other thing that's striking about this book, of course, is the respect it has for the gaps, the spaces. It needs to breathe. And that's one thing I think is important in poems too. There's nothing worse than a poem with too many words, if that makes sense. And so the breathing, the light between the words, the gaps between the words here were equally important somehow. And when you translate, you have to think about that too. And then there were difficult things in it to translate.
You touched there on what was difficult to translate. Charlie's work is short in parts and longer in others. It's pithy, it's idiomatic. There are beautiful quotations. How did the Welsh language lend itself to that style of writing?
Yes. Well, some things came and you were happy thinking, well, we discussed briefly before we came onto this airing now, the gift of the word cwtch we have in Welsh. So when that came about how a cwtch is better than a cake, then I thought, oh, da iawn, lucky, I can use that word, and knowing that it was going to happen. But then, you know that word too, don't you, Charlie?
I do, yeah, I like that word, yeah, it's a good word.
But then there were other things like winging it and turn on a sixpence, and even the wild, unexpected things.
Yeah.
Difficult. And then you have to leave it and come back and start again, because you have to start again always, especially with a shortish work, because it has to flow completely. I thought a little bit like writing an englyn. Charlie, in Wales we have this form called an englyn, which is a 4-line poem with 30 syllables, and that's pithy and needs a lot of thought, and you can't waste any word. So there's a bit of the quality of the englyn, I think, in this in this book.
Charlie, you must have a great deal of trust in translators like Mererid to take on your work and your vision, if you'll forgive me with such a cliched term there, but you must have a lot of trust in your translators. Well,
yeah, you do. I mean, obviously, because ultimately they know and you don't. But often with some of the translators, we heard from them a lot. Like there were questions But for the Welsh translation, it was very quiet, amazingly so, and impressively so. Yeah. So Mererid is obviously, the thing is, I'll never know. You know, I don't know. I don't speak Welsh, and therefore I don't know how the meaning is carried. But judging from what you've just said, I have complete trust in what you've written. And I actually really loved what you said about the gaps. And because when I was putting the book together, a lot of people when I showed them, you know, I had it in a little ring binder, this book, and people in the business would say, well, yeah, you know, you've probably got too many gaps there. And I said, but I want them. And they were, well, why? It's just blank. I said, I don't think it is blank. There's nothing. Spaces aren't blank. Spaces are there for us to fill. And my favorite conversations are ones where you have long silences because there's trust. You're not uncomfortable with pauses. And I don't know whether that's communicated in the book why there are space, but I love the idea of having. So I love that you recognise that. You know, I mean, you clearly recognise a lot. I was saying earlier, I kind of feel your name should be huge on the cover of the book in this translation. All along the book.
Well, the thing about the gaps is, I tell my students this, you know, that you have the words, but those gaps are key, because that's where without the gaps, the creative process isn't complete, because that's where the meaning comes. Right. And you have to that's where you can interact between what was said and what you think and how you interpret.
Yes.
But yes, but there were challenges and an enormous sense of responsibility. The other thing, Charlie, in Cymraeg, in Welsh, our nouns, every noun has a gender. So it's got to be either feminine or masculine. And a key word here, the mole, a wahadden, is feminine.
Feminine, yeah.
That nuances things throughout. And then, of course, the word fox. These are just problems in the title. The word fox, then we've got two words, and they're equally satisfactory, because sometimes when a language has two words, one word is less well used or more literary, has some kind of taste to it. But here we have cadno and llwynog, and after some deliberation, I went for cadno because llwynog, because cadno has a bit of a bite to it that I thought was unnecessary. And the sound which we write with two L's, had some kind of depth and slowed it down a little bit. I felt so that was a conundrum.
You've mentioned the words and the consideration that you gave to each word, that no word was wasted, and you've mentioned the gaps. I'm keen to talk now about the illustrations. Charlie, you say in your opening letter in your book that the illustrations are so important, the drawings, you need them, because they are, I think, if I can quote you here, if you'd allow me, they're like islands, places to get to in a sea of words. And that image, the sea of words, instantly made me think of the fact that we've been bombarded, I think it's fair to say, by information, particularly over the last year and a half. A lot of it negative, a lot of it quite dense. Do you think that the stillness of the image was a comfort to readers? Was it a comfort to you?
Oh, so many things there. I think making the drawings for me is a form of, it calms me down. I have anxiety often. And so drawing is I feel like I'm a runaway horse on the inside. And drawing has always, all my life since I was little, if I could just get something to make marks with, then I could stare at it and the whole world just stops. And it just calms down. So for me, the process of drawing is very calming. I think images, like I remember when I was probably maybe 10 or 11 and, I'd been reading books up till then and liking them. And then suddenly there was this cliff edge where books suddenly decided, or whoever was in charge decided, that you've reached an age where pictures aren't necessary anymore. You've grown out of them, or, so suddenly there were maybe one or two, or maybe occasionally in the middle of some adventure book, there'd be some photographs, but there was books were no longer punctuated with visual things to lose yourself in. And I remember feeling really sad. Like I felt bereft of images, that I was then cast into this world of type with no lines or color. And I found myself, secretly always going back. All my life, I've gone back to the graphic novels that I had when I was little, whether it's, Asterix or Obelix or Tintin or even Edward Ardizoni, who I don't know if you've heard of him, but I would get lost in his world, he drew and wrote his books. And for me, I could lose myself in both. And I felt they were a good marriage, and you're right. I think during this time, this last couple of years of so much fast information and fast images and words, that maybe, still images did give something, a serenity, a time to, breathe. Maybe not for everyone, but I know I hear from people who say they especially strangely that the NHS would print them out and put them on their walls, and I know some people didn't bother to read the words; they just liked the comfort of the images. So yeah, that's a crazy privilege for me to know that you can scribble away in some tiny room in some corner of the world, and what the marks you make on paper will give someone somewhere else some sense of comfort or peace. it's a mad idea. So I haven't really answered your question, have I?
You have, without a doubt. Mererid, if you'll allow me to come back to you, because I think something that Charlie said there is really important about that comfort and that connection. As someone who's multilingual, I know that Welsh speakers will be able to enjoy Charlie's work in English, but maybe they'll connect differently to it in Welsh if Welsh is their first language. What are your thoughts on that as someone that studies languages?
Yes, that's an interesting point, because yes, most of the readers of this Welsh book will be able to read the English book, if not all, that's sure. But I think we go back to that notion that this is a book for the soul. And I think we speak with the soul in our own language. I have a friend, Laura Carrasco, who teaches yoga, and she has remarked often that the practice is more effective if she can lead in the language of the people that she's showing. And I think with a book like this, where it is asking questions inside, and we've got words for that, and I can't remember, I don't think they're in the book, but we've got one word called mynwes, that is that place. There's not really an English word for that. It's where the soul lives. and you need sort of that. And then the other word that strikes me hearing you speak there, Charlie, is this curious word we have in Welsh, which is tangnefedd, which is a word for peace, although we have another word for peace, but it's about a peace between always two things, you and somebody else, you and your creator, or whatever you imagine that is, or you and yourself, between the body and the soul. And so many of these pages, you can open it on, and it doesn't really matter on which one, and there's an image and there are words, and between them, they can bring the body and the soul back together, I think. It brings that sense of tangnefedd. Maybe we should have called it tangnefedd. It would have been easier for you to write down.
I love that word. That's a lovely word. Can you say it one more time?
Tangnefedd. I'll write it to you afterwards. Or I don't know if anybody in charge of whatever that chat thing is. It's TANG, Tang, NEFEDD, Tangnefedd. It is a really lovely.
Tangnefedd.
Da iawn. That's perfect. But by the way, Megan, you were saying about the trust. What you don't know is after I finished, and I assume this goes for all the translators, we had like a little exam, a piece of paper with lots of questions asking, how did you translate X and Y? And of course, you wouldn't be surprised to know that they were the very things that caused this difficulty. You think, oh, well, of course, yes. Now that was a really difficult thing, and trying to remember how we tackled that, how I'd gone back and forth, and so that I wasn't expecting the test.
Who gave you the exam? I don't understand that. Who sent the questions?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where it came from. But it was asking things like, how did you translate? And then the really difficult things like home and cake and the wild, and I'm not sure where they came from, but I answered them as best as I could. And then there was a place at the end where you could put the things that caused difficulty. And winging it. I think winging it must have caused pretty much every language.
I feel terrible that I was somehow indirectly responsible for setting you an exam. Exams are like my idea of hell. So I'm really sorry. I don't know.
No, it was fantastic, really, because it really did make you think, yes, and in a way relieved that the passages that had caused you difficulty, that there was an anticipation that they would have.
Right.
If we stay with the language of exams and classrooms and syllabuses, Mererid, you know that in Wales the current education system is being looked at, reconsidered, reformed, you might say, to simplify it for people at home, with a focus on emotional intelligence and understanding. And I have no doubt that this book, once it's out there in the world in the Welsh language, there could definitely be room for it, couldn't there, in the classroom?
Yes, I don't know how much you know about this in England, but it is a radical reform. We're introducing what they call a purpose-led curriculum. Wow. And the purposes are 4, and they're about developing the pupils into becoming confident, creative, healthy, enterprising and ethical citizens of Wales and the world. So it's not about go to school so we can stuff information into your head, so when you come out you have patience.
I love this. This makes my heart sing, because I remember being about 9 or 10 or around there, where I was in a chemistry lesson, and I got overwhelmed with this question, and I put my hand up, and the teacher said I didn't connect with chemistry very well, and he said, "Yes, Mackesy." I said, "Can you just tell me why we're doing this?" And he said, "Excuse me?" I said, I just genuinely want to know why we're doing this. Like, why? Why is it important that I understand potassium permanganate's change in color? If you give me the why, I will really learn this, but I can't find one. And the lesson dissolved into this big discussion on where we were going, why we were having, it was really interesting, and it was inconclusive. And if this is the problem that we couldn't really fathom beyond, well, so you pass exams, if you pass the exam, then you do this, and then you get there, and it's some kind of ladder you're on, and of achievement and merit, and then you'll be better than other people, you'll be, because it's some kind of life is competitive. But hearing you speak, I think if you'd been there and you said, well, look at it this way, we would have all got really excited about education.
But this is not my curriculum. It's ours.
Well, I love it. Who has it, yeah.
Yeah, I do hope it'll be successful. It's going to call for a lot of guts, though, and a lot of resources, and a lot of help and support for the teachers who will.
Yeah, of course, it's wonderful.
But let's hope it'll work, and
maybe Mererid a lot of copies of y Bachgen, y Wahadden, y Llwynog a'r Ceffyl too, maybe.
But then the subjects are divided into different areas, and one of the areas, there are 6 of them, and they're areas of learning and experience, and one of them is health and well-being. But I was just thinking, listening to you say that, Charlie, and thinking again about differences between languages. The word for teacher is athro, and that comes, as I understand it, from an origin that means to nurture or to foster.
Oh, lovely.
And that's a very different idea from showing. Which is where teacher comes from. So it's about, taking the whole, the individual in front of you, and thinking, right, how can I foster this person? How can I nurture this person? And it is, if we could remember that as teachers, as athrawon, I think that would serve us really well.
It's a lovely. I mean, I have good friends who are teachers, and they have a tough job, and that's such a beautiful word, that the nurturing rather than showing. I love that.
On that note, I can't believe I'm saying this, but our 30 minutes as a trio, which is quite something, isn't it? And I'm glad to report that lots of people have been in touch with questions, and I did promise that I would try my best to get through them. So if you're willing to take the first one, that would be wonderful. Charlie, it's for you, from Fran. And Fran says, I love how you finish the book with "look how far we've come" instead of the traditional "the end." Where did the idea for this come from?
Hi, Fran. To be honest, I remember writing the end, and thinking, well, that's the end. And I just didn't like the look of the word, and I just crossed it out, and stared at it, thinking that's how I'd like it. And then so the process was not enjoying the feeling of the word. And then what alternative is there to the end? It's so finite, being the end. And I thought, well, why not just, the feeling is, instead of declaring an ending, why not celebrate, the distance we've traveled, celebrate, particularly, I would say, last couple of years, whatever, in life. I felt happier, more content. rather than there's something. I've never enjoyed the word "the end" anyway. I've never felt good about it. So it all came out at once. I wrote "the end," crossed it out, and stared at it, and then thought, "Now," and I wrote "look how," and I didn't think much of it. Because the book's made of hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper that I've drawn on, and most of them didn't get in the book, but that one just hung around, and it seemed like the right thing. And I think the message of the book also is, to do with the journey, and it's and sometimes we feel like, as the boy says, we've got such a long way to go, and it's important to remember how far you've come. And I think rather than say the end, just say, well, look how far. It's no more complex than that. I wish I had a deeper answer. So it was more instinctual. It was more from deep within me rather than some kind of calculated objective statement. I feel it's more comforting to be reminded of our journey and how well we've done in spite of things, rather than just the end, goodbye.
Taking a moment to process where we've been and what we've learned. I think it's a lesson we've all learned in the last couple of months, definitely.
Yeah.
Mererid, we have a question for you from Mair, and Mair says Charlie has some pages with just illustrations to tell the story. Did that make the process of translation harder for you or easier?
Hello, Mair. Oh, easier for sure. Because you really need to look at these illustrations if you're going to have any chance of getting the right words, because they move you on to the next sentiment, the next feeling, and the words then that come next are not without reference to the drawings, the illustrations that went before. And so, yes, they definitely did make it easier, because it was a page that I didn't have to think for that page at least, and it helped me greatly with the next one or the one before it.
Charlie, we have a question from Hannah, which I think will sort of build nicely on the question we just had from Mair. Have you ever had to change the illustrations to make sense to other language speakers? Maybe that an image didn't quite make sense in a different culture or language?
Oh, that's a very good question. Not that I'm aware of. I don't think so. It's a great question. As far as I remember, I didn't change any image. No. Yeah, it's interesting to thought. Yeah.
We've got another question from Joseph, and Joseph has sort of actually written a question that I'd scripted for you, Mererid. It says, I'm wondering if you read the Spanish translation before you read the Welsh, and if so, did it impact your translation at all?
No, I'm afraid I didn't, but I'm certainly going to now, that's for sure. And I won't wait until I have found the Spanish one and any others. But to go back to that previous question, of course, you're right, Charlie, it is a very good question, because animals and signs and have different meanings, don't they? In different. I remember being on a translation workshop once with a friend, now a friend from India, and we were working on a book from Iceland that was all about socks going missing behind radiators, and the socks and the radiators just wasn't a thing for her in Mumbai, so we had to ditch that project. It can cause challenges.
Charlie, the New York Times actually said, and this figure could be incorrect by now due to the success of your work, but that your work had been translated into 17 different languages. I'm assuming you don't speak 17 languages. So how does it feel knowing that there are all of these different people consuming your work in various different corners of the earth?
I feel a strange sense of I don't know. It's a sense of privilege that so many people have put their minds to translating them in the first place. I just find it a bit overwhelming and grateful, and I suppose I would love to have an in-depth understanding of each language, so I could see how the translations are, and Mererid's translation to Welsh, I would love to hear it, but would also know the language well enough to understand. Because I bet each translation has a slightly different. Each translator will have a different soul and a different take, and also I remember some countries didn't have words for, I think there's one, I can't remember which country it was, didn't have a word for kind, which I remember thinking that's quite a thing. So what words did you choose, and how do they come across? So yeah, I'm amazed to know that all these languages are the drawings have intermingled with these words that I'll never understand. It's a strange feeling. Yeah.
We have a question from Pat, who's written in and asked, did you have any special group of people or readers in mind when you wrote this, in particular children or adults, or in particular a profession such as nurses, as you've already referenced, or teachers?
No, I didn't. I just tried to write as simply and as honestly as I could. And I had, I think in the introduction it says it's for anyone, whether they're 80 or 8, and I think some readers are even 4, and some in their 90s. So I'm so thrilled that, I didn't really have a brief. I didn't give myself a brief because it was never going to be a book. So the book, we look back at all the drawings and said, well, there is a body of work that we can put together. So, and I have friends who have children, and I have friends who have grandparents, and my mother likes the drawings as well. So my mother's little sunroom is covered in the drawings. So I think it's a blurry answer, but just in brief, no, I had no age range in my head. I just tried to feel deep within me what is right to write, regardless of who's reading it, and hope that it lands somewhere. And for many, I'm sure it doesn't, but you can't please everybody. But I think, in a way, it's like this is an odd answer, but I think music, there are some sounds, some piece of music that everybody is moved by. Sometimes when I can't sleep at 3 a.m, or whatever, I watch, and this is absolutely true, I watch the old games of rugby in Cardiff Arms Park, and I watch Gareth Edwards, and I watch all these people, in fact 2 nights ago I was doing this, and these JPR Williams and JJ Williams, all these heroes, and then you hear Cardiff Arms Park start singing Bread of Heaven, and you see in the crowd, you see children, you see all ages singing. And that's to me a universal language, and hopefully, the book's done the same. That's my dog.
I think you have someone in the background that agrees with you there, definitely.
Yeah, that's Barney. Yeah, he's actually the inspiration for them all. Because he's just greedy. He's obsessed with not Kate, but Emmy. I know that was an odd way of answering the question. But anyway, there you go.
We have that, but Barney is special though, isn't he? Because he actually sort of contributed to the book indirectly by walking across some of your pages.
Yeah, it really does. Because, I do the drawings in ink, and then there's no space. So I would just spread them across the studio floor everywhere, and on top of armchairs, and then he often just walked straight across them. And he did on that one drawing that was, what's our greatest illusion, that and that life should be perfect, or something like that. The greatest illusions of life, and it was just hilarious that he chose that one to really mess up.
You couldn't have asked him.
No, I mean, that's right. It's extraordinary. Yeah.
I think it's.
And that was the same. That was the same night that I found the piece of paper with the teacup stain on. Yeah, and so I just drew them looking at it, and it just looked like the moon. Is that the moon? teacup.
It's particularly fitting that you choose to share so much of your work on Instagram, a platform that's renowned for perfection and curated perfection at that. How do you feel that people respond to your work on there? Because you've shared drawings at particularly painful times for us as a nation, and I refer specifically to the work you shared when we learned of the murder of Sarah Everard, for example. The work you share is so powerful. I wonder how people respond to that.
You wonder how they respond to
your sharing
about Sarah, or just in general?
about you at particular moments in time when you share work at times of, as I say, sort of collective grief and pain.
Grief. Yeah, it's, yeah, I sometimes I find it hard to describe how that feels, but I know that when Sarah, for instance, went missing, one of her friends emailed me and said, would you do a drawing to help us look for her? And so they were printed out and stuck around Clapham Common and stuff. And then obviously we know what happened, and then I did some drawings in memory of her, and then you get this outpouring of emotion that comes with them from people. And it's just, it's sort of, it's agony and a privilege and tragic and, moving that you can give people a voice perhaps to their emotions, or make an image that summarizes how they feel, or I don't know. So I think I've found myself in this position over time, where whether it's Sarah or other people that have, or the pandemics, or the NHS, or all these things where you feel this depth of feeling towards a person or a group of people who are going through something, even the fires in Australia or whatever. And so I just sit right here in this little room and just scribble away, and then put them out there. And it's difficult for me to find words, but it's a huge privilege. And I love reading what people say, and I try to reply. Sometimes I can't. I do try.
I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that your drawings, your words give an immense amount of comfort. I hope you'll allow me to say that. You definitely bring a lot of comfort and joy to lots of people. And on that note, I can't believe actually that we've made it to the end of our chat, but I shouldn't say the end, should I? I should take a moment to reflect on how far we've come.
Yeah, you have.
Before we virtually leave this lovely space, I wish we could stay longer. Please allow me to remind you on behalf of the Hay Festival that the Hay Festival Winter Weekend is happening in person. If you feel comfortable going and sharing space safely with people, it's happening in a couple of weeks' time. Tickets are available on the website, and it's going to be a brilliant event, I have no doubt about it, between the 24th and the 28th of November. It's one not to be missed. But for today, thank you for joining us. I hope you can agree that it's been a really, really lovely chat. Charlie Mackesy, Mererid Hopwood, thank you, diolch yn fawr, and hopefully next time we can sit in the same room and talk about the next amazing project you both will undoubtedly achieve. Diolch.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.